It's really a deep honor, a personal honor, to introduce you to tonight's program. David Grossman is one of Israel's preeminent authors and noted activists, and one of the JCCSF's most beloved guests. With 9 novels, a children's opera, multiple books of essays, plays, and 15 children's books, he has explored his country's internal and external landscape in an extraordinarily broad range of styles and genres. His novels, Sea Under Love, explore the Holocaust through the eyes of a child. In The Yellow Wind, he reported on life in the occupied territories in the 1980s. When the Intifada broke in 1988, his best-selling book was called Prophetic. For 6 months in the 90s, he joined a Jerusalem detective squad several evenings a week to research The Zigzag Kid. Some of you may have seen the film adaptation last summer at the Jewish Film Festival. He then spent the better part of 9 months with homeless teenagers in order to write Someone to Run With. His 2008 book, To the End of the Land, was written partly after the death of his youngest son, Uri, during the war in Lebanon. Since then, he has written a number of poems about the impossibility of mourning a child. He says, quote, "I feel poetry is more the language of grief than prose." Part narrative poem, part Greek tragedy, part Shalom Aleichem, Falling Out of Time consists of an elegiac tapestry of voices, all belonging to bereaved parents. Appearing here in conversation this evening is our other good friend, Peter Orner. His award-winning books include Esther Stories, The Second Coming of Mavala Shakongo, Love and Shame and Love, and most recently, Last Car Over the Sagamore Bridge. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Orner and David Grossman.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming. It's difficult to be moved by a book and then have to get up on stage and express that. And as I was finishing Falling Out of Time, I had this crazy vision of us all being here and everyone in the audience reading the book to themselves. That's impossible. David's come a long way to speak to us. But I hope that gives you some indication of what kind of book we're dealing with here. It's that intimate and that personal, and yet, at the same time, communal. And I think all of these things are things I hope we get into. But first, I wanted to ask David Grossman to read from the book, if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Shabbat Shalom to all of you. I'll read some pages from the beginning of Falling Out of Time, translated from the Hebrew by Jessica Cohen. Town Chronicler. As they sit eating dinner, the man's face suddenly turns. He thrusts his plate away. Knives and forks clang. He stands up and seems not to know where he is. The woman recoils in her chair. His gaze hovers around her without taking hold, and she, wounded already by disaster, senses immediately, it's here again, touching me. Its cold fingers on my lips. But what happened? She whispers with her eyes. Bewildered, the man looks at her and speaks. I have to go. Where? To him. Where? To him, there. To the place where it happened? No, there. What do you mean, there? I don't know. You're scaring me. Just to see him once more. But what could you see now? What is left to see? I might be able to see him there, or maybe even talk to him. Talk. Town chronicler. Now they both unfold, awaken. The man speaks again. Your voice, it's back. Yours too. How I missed your voice. I thought that we'd never... I missed your voice more than I missed my own. But what is there? There's no such place. There does not exist. If you go there, it does. But you don't come back. No one ever has, because only the dead have gone. And you, how will you go? I will go there alive, but you won't come back. Maybe he's waiting for us. He is not. It's been 5 years and he's still not. He is not. Maybe he's wondering why we gave up on him so quickly the minute they notified us. Look at me. Look into my eyes. What are you doing to us? It's me. Can't you see that this is us, the two of us? This is our home, our kitchen. Come, sit down. I'll give you some soup. Man, lovely. So lovely the kitchen is. Lovely right now with you ladling soup. Here it's warm and soft, and steam covers the cold window pane. Town chronicler. Perhaps because of the long years of silence, his hoarse voice fades to a whisper. He does not take his eyes off her. He watches so intently that her hand trembles. Men, and the loveliest of all are your tender, curved arms. Life is here, dear one. I had forgotten. Life is in the place where you ladle soup under the glowing light. You did well to remind me. We are here, and he is there. And a timeless border stands between us. I had forgotten. We are here, and he is... But it's impossible. Impossible. Woman, look at me. No, not with that empty gaze. Stop. Come back to me, to us. It's so easy to forsake us and this light and tender arms and the thought that we have come back to life and that time nonetheless places, thin compresses. Man, no, this is impossible. It's no longer possible that that the sun, that the watches, the shops, that the moon, the couples, the tree-lined boulevard turn green, that blood in our vein, that spring and autumn, that people innocently, that things just are, that the children of others, that their brightness and warmness. Woman, be careful. You are saying things. The threads are so fine. Men, at night, people came bearing news. They walked a long way, quietly, grave, and perhaps as they did so, they stole a taste, a lick. With a child's wonder, they learned they could hold death in their mouths like sweets made of poison, to which they are miraculously immune. We opened the door, this one. We stood here, you and I, shoulder to shoulder. They on the threshold and we facing them, and they mercifully, quietly stood there and gave us the breath of death. Woman, it was awfully quiet. Cold flames lapped around us. I said, I knew tonight you would come. I thought, come, noiseful void. Man, from far away I heard you. Don't be afraid, you said. I did not shout when he was born, and I won't shout now either. Woman, our prior life kept growing inside us for a few moments longer. Speech, movements, expressions. Man and woman. Now, for a moment, we sink, both not saying the same words, not bewailing him for now, but bewailing the music of our previous life, the wondrously simple, the ease, the face free of wrinkles. Woman, but we promised each other, we swore to be, to ache, to miss him, to live. So what is it now that makes you suddenly tear away? Man, after that night, a stranger came and grasped my shoulders and said, save what is left, fight, try to heal, look into her eyes, cling to her eyes, always her eyes, do not let go. Woman, don't go back there to those days, do not turn back your gaze. Men, in the darkness I saw one eye weeping and one eye crazed, a human eye extinguished, and the eye of a beast half devoured in the predator's mouth, soaked with blood, insane, peered out at me from your eye. Woman, the earth gaped open, gulped us and disgorged. Don't go back there. Do not go, not even one step out of the light. Man, I could not, I dare not look into your eye, the eye of madness, into your nonness. Woman, I did not see you. I did not see a thing. From the human eye or the eye of the beast, my soul was uprooted. It was very cold then, and it is cold now too. Come to sleep. It's late. Men, for 5 years we unspoke that night. You fell mute, then I. For you the quiet was good, and I felt it clutched at my throat. One after the other, the words died, and we were like a house when the lights go slowly out until a somber silence fell. Woman, and in it I rediscovered you and him. A dark mantle cloaked the three of us, enfolded us with him, and we were mute like him, 3 embryos conceived by the bane. Men, and together we were born on the other side, without words, without colors, and we learned to live the inverse of life. Shall I read just for 2-3 minutes in Hebrew? I would like the Hebrew to echo here. I'll read something different. I'll read something that the Duke, there is a Duke in this book. Yeah. Just a second. דוכס. השחר, מתוך הלילה הנתעב, מתיאטרון סיוטיו, אני שב ונחלץ ומקבץ את עצמי, פיסות פיסות, פסיפס דוכס. הנה ידי הפשוטה אל הלחם, וריחו הטרי וגופו החמים, ולפני כן עיני לחלון הולכת, נמשכת, אל 2 ציפורים בשלולית, אל שחר הולך הכלילי, הבית דוכס התברך, למולך כמו על טס יום רך ותינוק, שעוד לא צמחו לו שיניים, אבל כבר שבוע הרחק בגבעות, גבר כמו תער פתוח הולך וחותך ראשו בשמיים, וכאן בארמון בקיתון הפרטי, קומקום שורק והבל קפה, ואני שענן ואיטי ורפה, אין ספק, דוכס למופת. לא. לא. איש לא פונה אור מלילו, עצמות חלולות כולו. כוח הכובד של האסון. חשבת שאתה מוגן, דוכסון. חשבת שאתה חסין, גדודיך מלוא הארץ פרוסים, 1000 פרשים על 1000 סוסים, ואתה רסיסי חרסים. אבל קם אל יומו, לובש בדממה, נשל לשמו, מלבה בליבו גחלים וממות, משכנע בכל כוחו את עצמו שעוד הוא זוכר, איך זה סתם להיות, איך לבהות, למשל, איך בוהים, איך בוהה לו אדם לתומו, איך אפשר לו לרגע תמים לשכוח את מה שצרוב, שאסון לו בפנים. בקיצור, מתחזה שכזה, ערמומי, מעמיד פני אחד יומיומי, שעינו אל חלון פתוח נמשכת, שידו פשוטה בתכלית אל הלחם, ובתוך כל זה, פתאום, אני נופל, צולל. אני רק צל צילו של ההולך שם לבדו, של החורט באדמתי בצעדים כבדים את גזר הדין, כל היש, הילדי הקטן, מחמדי, אבודי, כל היש, מעכשיו יהדהד את האין. Thank you.
Thank you very much for reading. I wanted to just start with a fairly basic question, and that is, and I think it's fairly obvious now to the audience, this is has a different form than work people might be familiar with from you. And I wonder if you could speak about the poetry in the book, the dramatic action of the book, etc.
Yeah. It is different because until now I never wrote such a mixture of poems and prose and radio play and maybe even libretto for opera or theater play. I felt that when you write about a violation of the rules of nature even, you know, the right order of things is that parents die before their children. If you describe such a situation, the way you describe it must suit the content. And I was looking for something different, and I didn't know what that is. And I started writing it as prose, but it was not accurate enough, I feel. And then suddenly, and I cannot tell you why it happened, but suddenly it was very clear that I need to break the lines, and I need the rhythm of poetry. Maybe I have to start even earlier, you know, maybe first there was the hesitation whether to write it at all. Because, you know, when you experience a catastrophe, I think the first reaction is to be silent, not to speak. And the first reaction are physical, you know, you want to run to the end of the world or to climb on a roof and to shout your soul out or to dig a hole in the ground like my protagonist here do.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while comes a moment when you feel that you have to give words. You know, I think this is what makes us human, that we try to give names to what we feel and what we think. And the language is such an efficient way of touching life, and the more nuanced the language is, the more nuances of life you touch. And I remember when it happened to us, when we lost our son Uri almost 8 years ago, we received lots of letters of condolences from Israel and from out of Israel. And I noticed something, that some of them were written by writers, and writers that I read their books and was stunned by the richness of their language. And when I read the letters, I could not help noticing that all of them wrote in one voice, as if somebody has dictated it to them, and they said, we are speechless. There are no words to describe something like that. And I thought, yes, I'm also speechless, but after a while, I needed to give my private names to it, because it was either the speechlessness or the cliches in which we always talk about things that are beyond our ability to utter them. You know, both great pleasure and great pain are inexpressible or unexpressible. And I remember that I thought that if I was unfortunate to be sent to this island of exile, which grief is in a way, and it's really an exile from everything I knew beforehand, at least if I have to be there on this island, at least I'll try to map it with my own words, because this is the only way I know how to understand my life in every condition. This is a very extreme one, but okay, this is my way. And then I sat and I wrote it, and after having written it again, I was quite shocked that I was able to write it as the centaur. There is also a centaur in the book. It gets more and more surreal, I know. As the centaur says in the very last lines of the book, that he cannot understand how he dared to write it. Yeah.
There's, and you've spoken, you're somebody who has faith in the power of words to convey emotion, and that's, your whole life has been much devoted to that. And it seems that the tension in this book between words that can't quite convey what you desperately need them to convey versus the need to do it. And I'm wondering if the book is as much about the act of writing itself as a way of trying. I'm wondering if you could talk about the book as in the centaur character being prominent in that, about writing itself being a powerful force in the book.
Yeah. There is a journey in the book. After the conversation between the man and the woman, it's, as you understood, it's a kind of a very Heimish situation of a man and a woman, and they sit quietly, because later we realized that they didn't speak a word in the last 5 years since they lost their son. And the man says, I have to go there, and he cannot explain what is there. And he begs her to come with him. He needs her, he loves her, he wants her to be with him in this journey. And she refuses. She says, you're not going there to him, you're going in a way out of your mind, and I will not follow you there, because for 5 years, day and night, I bite my flesh in order not to lose my mind. And he leaves the little hut where they live, and he stands in front of the hut, and he starts to encircle himself with small steps, and then his feet leads him, and he circles the little hut where they live and the little village. And the next thing, we find him walking on the tip of the hill, the top of the tip, how do you say, of the hills, and around the big city. And he walks. Now, he walks pointlessly. There is not any target to where, or physical target. He wants to get as close as possible to the place where the living ones can still touch the dead, can still feel the warmth and vitality of those whom they have lost. And his walk, this magical circle that he does around the city, like the circling of Jericho, for example, that made the walls of Jericho fall, this walk starts to attract people from within the city who are in the same position, who are paralyzed by their own catastrophe. And they are magneted to him. They cannot resist him. They are really magneted from their life, from kitchens and bedrooms and wherever. And the palace itself, the Duke also follows him. And when they start to walk, suddenly they are able to start to talk after years of being totally silent or stammering or all kind of being mute. And for me, this book, more than everything else, is a trip to find, or a journey to find, a way to talk about this, about the things that cannot be uttered.
As I was reading it, there's a line from William James that I've always been stunned by. And he says something to the effect of, if we knew all of the personal tragic dramas in people's lives in one city, if you could possibly have that, your head would explode. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, Mr. James. But it occurred to me that when the other bereaved parents join the walking man, that it was some way of getting out of the exile of grief. Would that,
I think
in some way?
When they are together, they are able to share something that only people in this situation can share and can understand. But even so, after all, grief is a very isolating human predicament. There is something that isolates you and put yourself in front of what has happened, and not only in front of that, but in front of death. It really creates new understanding of the living and death. Now, it's very hard to articulate it, but I think when you allow yourself to be exposed to that, you feel the intensity of both life and death in such an immense, strong way that I have never experienced before. I also thought, nobody knows what exists there on the other side. Yes, I'm not a believer, so I cannot take any comfort from believing in Olam Haba, in afterlife, in the next, in paradise or hell or whatever. I can take some comfort that there is good hell somewhere. Yeah, but nobody really, 2-3 millions of years that man lives on this earth, and nobody really knows what is there. But I think when I wrote it, I got a glimpse of something that, for a non-believer, there is really one way to get the feeling of what is there, to scratch a little this hermetic, monolithic envelope of over there. And this is the way of art, of writing prose or poetry or making music or theater or cinema, whatever. Art, after all, if it's serious, this is one of the very few places where life and death coexist simultaneously. Life and loss of life coexist simultaneously. And I think that if we think of every serious piece of art that we have experienced, read or listened to or saw on stage, it always has to do with this proximity of life and death, where these two are radiating towards each other.
There's humor in this book, and
Should be.
I wanted to share a small passage between the Centaur and the Town Chronicler. Centaur says, the Town Chronicler is taking notes. He's actually going out into the village and getting into people's private space and asking questions. And the Centaur says to him, "You again? Won't you ever shut up? Tell me about the soccer ball, about the cowboy hat, about birthdays. Tell me about them, about the magician's wand, the blue kite." And then the Centaur, that was the Town Chronicler, the Centaur, "Junk, memory husks." Town Chronicler, "At least tell me something about the cradle." The Centaur says, "How about you tell me something about yourself for a change?" And the shift in the book in that particular moment, again, this idea of grief of being so individual, and yet these are two actually bereaved parents coming at it from a completely different direction. The Town Chronicler being somebody who is completely trapped and can't speak at all, and the Centaur, who is, we should say, half man, half desk in this case.
Half writer, half writing desk.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. He wanted to write about his own grief, and he cannot write, and he cannot not write, and after some years he assimilated with his writing desk, which for some people is hell. I find it like paradise.
I wanted to go back to this idea of walking again, just to ask a question. I mean, do you think that, and this is not the first time in your books where people walk at night. It's a motif that occurs a lot and strikes me, and I wonder if what you have to say about the physical act of walking and how it might relate to how we might, I don't know if we can walk, we certainly can't walk off grief, but do you think it's a way of handling?
I'm a walker, to start with that. I mean, I start every morning at 5:45 walking 5 kilometers with my wife and a couple of friends and a dog, which is really essential. Almost in all my books, there is a jogger or a swimmer or a walker. I need that. I mean, when I write, by the way, I'm walking. I cannot sit. It's strange, but I try to make myself sit, and then I have an idea, and I find myself walking very rapidly. Sometimes it's in one quite small room, but I need to. My wife says that I leave marks of burns on the carpet, like a prisoner, you know. But of course, in this book, there is another dimension to it, because, you know, the nature of a catastrophe is that it paralyzes you. It has the ability to paralyze you and to make you helpless and apathetic. And I felt I cannot accept it. I know it sounds strange, but I believe that being an artist, being a writer, being an artist, is being able to constantly move. What is it? Is it a real cricket or?
Natural world has entered.
I felt, you know, even kind of an insult to be paralyzed by that. And I needed that in the book that I write about it, it will be full with movement, with flexibility, with the ability to look at things from different points of view. And I think that in so many of my books, I wrote about an individual that is facing an outer arbitrariness, and he or she is paralyzed because of that. You know, let it be the arbitrariness that the body has upon our soul, or the maybe ultimate arbitrariness of the Nazis during the Shoah. Or I wrote a lot, and I mean, since it's obvious, I will say twice, there is no comparison. I wrote a lot about the occupation that we live in Israel between us and the Palestinians. I try to understand what happens to an individual who is crushed by such strong arbitrariness. And I learned that when I write about it, when I find new words to describe the gap between me as an individual and this outer, faceless arbitrariness, by the very fact that I wrote about it, something has changed. I no more stand in the place where I was before I started writing. And my relationship with this arbitrariness have changed. And maybe I also discovered some cracks within this arbitrariness. And also here, when I tried to write about, you know, this arbitrariness that befell on my family's life, the need not to be defined by catastrophe, yes? And I really think that, you know, sometimes the only liberty that one has is to describe his own tragedy with his own words, not with words that others try to impose on him.
I wanted to, you talk about these forces, these arbitrary forces, and it seems that in much of your work, in this book too, domesticity, you know, kind of the comforts of home, the soup, the town chronicler's wife's shoulder. He loves his wife's shoulder, even though they haven't spoken in a very long time. And I think into the end of the land, when Offer makes the bed, he's constructing this bed for his parents. I wonder do you think that domesticity is sort of some bulwark against these political forces? I mean, I know it's not going to save us, but it seems that I go back again in your work to that idea that the comforts of family versus certain responsibilities that you have to do, and that's such a tragic choice oftentimes. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm a very domestic person. And I think, I know it's strange to say it here on stage, but I'm a very private person in my life, really. And there's such power and comfort in domesticity, in routine, in everydayness, especially when reality around us is so unexpected, unpredictable, violent, not understandable even. But even if I don't think of our reality in Israel, even when I think about history, I believe that the most important moments in the history of mankind, they have not occurred on battlefields or in palaces or in parliaments, but rather in bedrooms and kitchens and children rooms. And I think even when you write a book that kind of an epos of the history of Israel or the life of Israel, the best way for me to touch it is through the small particles of home, of relationship between a man and a woman, parents and their children. And these are things that I understand. I understand them much more than I understand politics or, the roots of the conflict or all these big words. And even when I write articles about the situation, in most times I will try to filter it through the eyes of people who are trapped in this situation. I really think, the real tragic aspect of our conflict in the Middle East is that we are all trapped there, sometimes or most times even against our will, and we are lost. We are lost. And when I say lost, I mean we and the Palestinians. We really are lost in a way that, we need a hand to guide us out of it. Behind all the arguments and the debates and all that, you look at the people and you see lost people who are trapped in an impossible situation, people who try to live normal life in a totally abnormal situation. It's like sometimes I compare it, to someone who tries to take a little candle in the middle of a thunderstorm, and to keep it lightning.
In one of your essays, you quote Italian writer Natalia Ginsburg, and you say that as soon as one writes, one miraculously ignores the rest of the circumstances of one's life. And I wanted to bring it back to the falling out of time in the sense that there's a merging, and I don't want to give away the end by any means, but I wonder if you could speak to the way that private pain becomes universal among the walkers.
Yeah. Well, some of it I think I mentioned before about solidarity on the one hand and isolation on the other hand. But may I answer from another point of view now that you bring it up? I thought, in Israel, and we are just 3-4 days after the National Memorial Day for the soldiers who died in wars. In Israel, the culture and the ceremonies and the state of mind of people are so much defined by the deaths of so many soldiers. And it's important, I guess, for a country who is deep in war for more than a century, even though Israel is only 66 years old, but still, I mean, there is this tradition of violence that we are immersed in, that is directed at us and that we turn towards our neighbors. And since we lost our son in war, I had the chance to look how this mechanism works. And I think that the more the country feels guilty for the death of these soldiers, the more it tends to glorify them, to idealize them. It needs that. And I felt that, you know, when a soldier dies, immediately he's being nationalized. He belongs to the nation. And for me, writing this book was also to reclaim the privacy and the intimacy of this occurrence.
It's one of the most moving passages, and I thought I would read it as we start to close. Walking Man. At least we parted without anger. I told him, and without resentment, you loved us and were loved. It seems to speak very directly to that reclamation you speak of. I wanted to ask you, and it's related to much of what you've been talking about, but what is it like for you to be a fiction writer, and as well as a nonfiction writer and a journalist who definitely is not afraid to wade into politics and writes about it? But I wonder, what is it like for you to be asked political questions as if you know, there's a lot of minds working on this problem, and you're often called upon to come up with answers. What kind of pressure do you feel when you're faced with people asking you, well, what should we do?
First, let me be very clear. I so much more prefer to write fiction than non-fiction. And there is such sweetness in inventing a whole world. You know, I'm now about to finish another novel that I'm writing, and I think it's such a great thing that you can create this being that acts harmoniously with all its parts and particles and all the relationship between all these imaginary characters. They function like in a healthy body. And very soon I will experience the sadness of parting and you know, going to the next book. But right now I still take this real pleasure of being with it and being surprised by it. And there is something so total about writing a novel. When you write nonfiction, you come to a reality that exists. You don't have to invent it. I mean, you can, of course, invent it in the way you describe it. If you find new nuances in it, you invent part of it. If you allow some contents that until then were hidden, you allow them to surface, you create something there. It's a creative description of reality. But nothing can be compared to the totality of writing a novel that you have. You know, I sometimes think of it like hiding a family of 50 members under the ground in a cellar in your backyard during a war, and they cannot go out, and nobody knows who is there, and you are the only one. You have to go every day, once or twice, and you have to talk with them and to listen to them and to ventilate them a little, and you do it, and to to tell them about the progress of the war and the chances of them to be saved. And you also have to take out their 90 pots, yes, because you have to do it. You have to do the lowest and the highest, the loftiest human actions, and you have to prevail in all the layers between this and that. And it's really a sense of, not responsibility is too a weak word for it, because it's a way of being. I mean, so much of my life is hidden because of that, because, I mean, okay, my wife, some friends, they know generally what I'm doing, but the main thing, the activity, the whole life that takes place while one, you know it as a writer, it's boiling all the time, and it's only yours, because, I mean, Yoshua or Amos Oz will not volunteer to write my stories, and vice versa. They are not relevant to them. And about being asked, I think I look at our reality also as a writer. I mean, trying to look at it from different points of view. I think usually politicians are trapped in one point of view. And they are unable to liberate themselves. And it's so dangerous, because in this situation, not only that they will not be prepared for signs of peace, but they will not be prepared for signs of war as well, because they are trapped. And the heart of writing is the ability to move all the time, to move between different points of view, and to try to envelope every given situation. If I had to write a novel about our conversation here, so I'll write it maybe from my point of view, and then from your point of view, and from your point of view, and from you telling your 4-year-old daughter about how it was here, and maybe your dog is eavesdropping on it.
She would be.
The more you envelope this reality, the more you get real, the more you touch reality. Yeah, even when I write political articles, there is also the function of the language, the need to be accurate in language, not to allow all those big systems who have such a strong interest in manipulating the language, the government and the media and the army and our fears and our enemies. All these are big systems that try to manipulate the language, and it's so important to be accurate in it.
There's a moment that has stayed with me for a long time, and that's towards the end of To the End of the Land.
I think
yeah.
I'm not sure your microphone
Am I good?
works.
You can hear me? Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe only here. Yeah, because I hear.
South.
Yeah.
Towards the end of To the End of the Land, there's a moment where Ora remembers having argued with Ofer, telling him never shoot to hurt anybody, which is a beautiful thing for a mother to say, but for a soldier to hear, especially where he is going, it's maybe not the most practical advice. And it struck me as being a great moment of how fiction complicates things that a commander would never entertain in the world. Of course, it's unworkable, but it struck me as being a great example of what a mother can say over a general.
Yeah. And a father, if I may say.
Yeah.
I also said it to both of my sons, and I stand behind it. But of course, there is always the question that you just now described. Maybe by planting this doubt within him, he might not function well at the moment of truth, so to say, yes? And this is, I think, in a small scale, really the big dilemma of our being there, especially as parents. I mean, on the one hand, we want to raise up our children to be, open and humanist and giving trust in people, liberal, dialogical, but at the same time, we live in a reality that defies all the above. And in order to function well in this sometimes catastrophe zone of the Middle East, maybe all these qualities that I try to educate my children on were not adequate. And this is, again, a very a deep question of how to remain a mensch in such an unmensch situation.
I know there's a lot of writers in the room, and even some of my students are here. I wonder if you could speak, last time you were here, which feels like it was very recently, but apparently it was 4 years ago, I remembered you say something that I always tell myself and my students and anyone who comes anywhere near me, and that is that when you're working on a book, if the book doesn't challenge your original conception, it's not working. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something I believe you said something along those lines.
I still agree with myself.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder, is that always the case, and did you feel it in this new book? I mean, for us, new. I know for you, it's
Yes, with this book definitely, and with To the End of the Land, of course. I think not in all of my books. There were books that I wrote, like The Zigzag Kid or Someone to Run With, that I wrote just in order to recover from previous books. It's always a little difficult for me to understand that these are the most beloved books that I wrote. But yes, I think, what's the point of writing a book that does not jar your basic premises? Go do other things if you don't. I mean, because really to write a novel, really, I think that the process is to in a way to break, to crumble, can you say so, yourself to the smallest pieces, particles, and then to rebuild them again in a form of a story. Mm-hmm. And if you do it, suddenly you yourself, you are new to yourself. And I think I really grew up through some people, of course, but mainly through books that really have changed me, books that have read me in a way that opened my eyes and made me different and more mature in some ways. And Kafka wrote the famous quotation of Kafka, we need books to be like an axe to the frozen sea in our soul. He said, we do not want entertaining books that are entertaining we can write ourselves. Kafka. Let us see him writing very entertaining books.
Instead, take an axe. That's what he... there's a line. We're going to open it up for questions, but I wanted to. As towards the end of this book, there's a line that I wanted to also point out, and that is that when the walkers and the group of walkers, the teacher and the chronicler and the net mender and the duke, who have a nice. You all need to read this, but they couple off these walkers. But there's a line, there is breath inside the pain. There is breath inside the pain. And that, it struck me that, that much of the book goes towards an opening in the grief, that it's never going to end, but there's breath inside it.
Yeah. Yes, I can testify only for myself, because I know how difficult it is to breathe within the pain of grief. And yet I think there are ways to be able to do it. This is not a how-to-do book, how to breathe within grief. No, not at all. But I can say that for myself, writing it, creating a place and even a home for me in a world that became so much of an exile. Mm-hmm. There was a kind of a small, not really tikkun, but doing something right in a world that turned to be all wrong. And I gave this line to a child, that this is his only appearance in the book. Suddenly there is a child in the room of the centaur, and he says, יש נשימה בתוך הכאב, יש נשימה בתוך הכאב. There is a breath within pain. And if you allow yourself to breathe, if you understand that all that you can do in such situation of grief is to try to remember without dying of it, and to forget without killing, to find this very subtle balance. It's, I mean, you have to work very hard in grief. It's not nothing taken for granted, and it needs a very intended and opinionated effort all the time in order to act against the gravity of grief. I think if we allow ourselves to do it, each one in his or her own way, and every one of us has experienced a loss of someone who is dear to him or to her, we might feel that we are no more victims in the way that we were beforehand. That we are, as I said, we are not helpless, not passive, not victims. We cannot reverse the events, of course, but we can stand in a somewhat different place where we stood before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have some water?
No, I'm fine. Okay.
We have some time for some questions.
Yeah, so
Who
I
is-
think we're going to, Stephanie's going to.
Stephanie is taking, okay.
Start right here in front.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this evening. My question is, why now this book? I mean, I guess, is this a book you could have written 2 or 3 years ago, or is this sort of in the progression of time in your own process and that? I mean, what brought you to this book now?
No, I finished writing it more than 3 years ago. I was writing To the End of the Land, which tells about an Israeli woman, Ora, whose son is being sent to a military operation in the West Bank. And she has a very poignant guess that he is going to die. And she decides she will run away from the notifiers. She understands that it takes 2 for bad news, 1 to deliver and 1 to receive. So what if she is not there to receive? Maybe, she will gain some time, she will be able to reverse the wheel of events for a day or a second even. And the book is, in this book, she runs away to the Galilee and she starts walking. It's a walk that she has planned to do with this son. And now when he volunteered to go to this military operation, she goes there not alone, but with a man who was the love of her youth, and maybe he's the love of her life, Avram, a man who was like a sparkle of imagination and inventiveness and sensuality and passion until he was 21, and then he fell captive by the Egyptians in the 73 war. And he came back broken in his mind and his body, but she insists on him. And she takes him with her and she starts to tell him about the life of the family. What does it mean to be a family? What does it mean to be parents, sibling? And step by step, she gives a full description of this domesticity, of this family life of her, and at the same time she brings him back to life that he rejects. And when I was near the end of the writing of this book, there was the war in Lebanon, and we experienced the loss of our son in a very, I don't know how to describe it, coincidence. And I knew I will finish this book To the End of the Land. And then when I finished it, I felt that I want now to describe what happened next in my life. So the result is this book is falling out of time.
Next question up here, David.
I don't see. Yeah.
There's one right
Do you-
here.
yeah.
Corner.
Up here.
Oh, yep.
Thank you so much.
Can
For
you
all
stand
your-
up? We don't know where the speaker is. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay.
On the
Yeah,
left.
yeah. Okay.
When you read in Hebrew, I was, even though I don't speak Hebrew, I was very struck by the sound and the rhythm, and I felt there was even more, there was a meaning contained in the rhythm. I wonder if, because the form is so different from your other books, if you found yourself bringing through an older form of Hebrew, using it in a different way. There, in the translation, there are sections that have that feeling of fable, parable, and I was wondering if that was true in Hebrew, and if part of that rhythm was connecting to an older form.
Yeah. I guess I am influenced by older forms of Hebrew, mainly the biblical forms. I don't know if you could have noticed, but in Hebrew there are rhymes in the poems, which do not exist in English, German, Italian, or any other language, because it's almost undone to write in rhymes. In Hebrew, it's still okay. Since I think that Jews who were the ones who invented the piyutim, I don't know how to call piyut in English. Liturgy, yes, liturgy. In rhymes, I found it should be like that. It's not complete rhymes, but there are, you hear the insinuation of a rhyme between the lines. Yes, so there is, of course, biblical lamentation there, and I was asked today by friends about the echoes of Greek choir, because there is a choir here. They speak in a choir sometimes, the walking, and I said, yes, of course, it was in the back of my mind, but my choir is a choir of individualists. You can trace every sentence and find out to whom it belongs. Who is the one in the group who is able to say this and that sentence? By the way, there was a very unusual act of translating this book, because I felt that this book, more than my previous books, needs to be translated in a very, very careful way. I hope the previous ones had also been translated carefully, but this one specifically. And I did something I never did before, and from now on I'm going to do it. I invited 7 of my translators to a translation center in a small city in Germany, in Strahlen. There is a center for translation, a house with 24,000 volumes of dictionaries. Can you imagine? From every possible language to every possible language. And we sat there for 4 days.
Wow.
And I started by reading a poem and stopped. And then they started to discuss among them. And then they consult from different, how each language can contribute some ideas to the other language. And things, I say in Hebrew, ubar. Ubar is the fetus, but in English there is a fetus, there is an embryo, or maybe an unborn, as it was translated in the German. When do you use in German the third person, and when you move to the second person? When the man longs for the steaks he used to do with his son, they ask, what kind of steak? It had to fit the social, economical layer of this family. All kind of small and big questions. For example, in Hebrew we say Av Shakul, Em Shakula, bereaved father, bereaved mother, but there is a special word for the bereavement of parents, of father and brother, father and mother, which does not exist in many other language, this specificity of bereavement. And there were places where you could have seen the differences between the 7 cultures and the 7 languages and the 7 personalities of the translators. And there were places where the German translators said, oh no, this is too sentimental. And immediately the Italian and the Spanish jumped on her and said, no, it's emotional. This is exactly the right temperature of things.
All right, our next question over here to your guys' right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just so moved when you said about being in the Middle East, that we are all lost and we need a hand to guide us out. And I was thinking about how in your book you wrote, you're really writing into grief as a way of getting to some kind of transformation. And paradoxically, at the core of this lostness that you're talking about in the Middle East, it seems to me about grief gone awry. And I wonder, I think you must have thought very deeply about grief gone awry into violence, and I wonder if you might share some of your thoughts about that with us.
You know, one can take both ways from grief. The most accessible way is the way of revenge, rage, hate. Since my ultimate goal is that there will be peace between us and the Palestinians, and that both peoples will get the privilege to explore some normalcy and just to be, with capital B, not only to survive from one catastrophe to another. I refused from the very first moment to yield to hatred and to rage. I had my moments, of course, but I don't think it will lead, this way will lead us to a fruitful or productive solution. Only more and more people will be swept into this circle of victims and families of victims and haters and violent people. Sometimes it's really hard to see how violence is accessible, how fears are accessible. I think we have a prime minister who is a genius in manipulating our fears, because Mr. Netanyahu is really, really an expert in stirring together the real dangers that Israel faces, and it faces real dangers, but he manages to confuse them with the echoes of past trauma. And we, as a traumatized nation, traumatized community, we are helpless in front of such manipulation. And we are almost programmed to act through fears and through suspicion and through hatred. I don't think that I ever heard from Mr. Netanyahu a word of vision. He is in office more than David Ben-Gurion was. And never I've heard from him a word of vision of what peace might bring to us, only regarding the impossibility of peace or the dangers of peace or the way the Palestinians are going to trick us and to trap us if, God forbid, there is peace. And, if you do not allow people to believe that there might be another option for them, if you only promise them more and more of the same tragedy, if you do not create within people some agents of positive thought regarding what can peace bring to us, and I'm not talking about the solutions, the territorial solution, or the question of security, of water, all these are very important things. I'm talking about a new way to be in this life. A way to be in life that are not dictated heavily by fear of death constantly. About being in life and believing that we have a future, because right now, tell you frankly, I think most Israelis, deep in their hearts, do not really believe that Israel has a future. And it's so heartbreaking to see such a creative and strong and ambitious and intelligent society acts against its own interests constantly for decades because we are unable to transgress, to be beyond or above. I think I used the wrong word, I don't know. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Next question up here on your left. Up here.
Yeah.
You were about to address my question with your last remarks. Do you think we as a human race will ever be able to evolve beyond our own limitations to reach this point of forgiveness and thinking in terms of peace rather than terms of fear?
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I think fears are so, as I said, accessible and dominant in us. Of course, the more a nation is stable, is self-confident, is living in positive conditions of life, it has the generosity to be more open, more dialogical, more tolerant. The more nation or religion is threatened, feels itself to be threatened, it becomes entrenched and it acts almost always in a violent way, unable even to control it. And it lacks the ability to distinguish between layers of aggression that are turned towards it. You know, I'm not a naive person, despite my looks, but being an Israeli who lived all his life in Israel, you cannot really be naive, even though I insist on some acquired naivete, which I think is very productive when you come to try to suggest some solutions. So I'm not talking about love between us and the Palestinians. I'm talking about some common interests that will allow us and them, as I said, to start to live the life we deserve, the life that we are deprived of for so many years. This is not the life that we can afford ourselves. Look at us. We are the greatest superpower in the region, the best air force in the world, the best intelligence. And yet, we are so terrified. We are not able to use our enormous military might as a vehicle in order to change our political situation. We are not able to take even the smallest calculated risk. All risks for us seem to be existential. They are not. Some are existential. As I said, we face some real existential dangers. Not all of them. And there are some elements now in the Middle East that if we strike a deal with them, like more moderate Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, we might be in another situation and solve the Palestinian question. It is still soluble. If we do not solve it now in the near next coming years, then we shall have to decide what we do. Do we eternalize the occupation and declare it's the longest occupation in history, maybe? Or do we become a binational state, which personally I don't want? I want Israel to be the homeland of the Jewish people and Palestine the homeland of the Palestinian people. I think these two peoples, they need to heal from more than 100 years of animosity and hatred that really distorts your soul. They need to heal, and for that you need some time of living not vis-a-vis war or vis-a-vis this specific other, but vis-a-vis yourself and your internal questions and challenges and problems. And I tell you frankly, I mean, I'm looking for this solution, the two-state solution, because I think the Palestinians should have their state, their sovereign, independent state. I want to see how this tormented people, how they are building up their life, again, not vis-a-vis the conflict or war. I want them to live life without fear. I don't want to cast shadow on them. And the more I cast shadow, I am casted by shadow. So this is one thing, but for me as an Israeli, as a Jew, to think of Israel living in time of peace, being able to have a feeling that we shall have a future there, as I said, that we have borders, that we know where we end, where the other starts. It's a historic disease for us as a people. It created so much tragedies for us that we never knew where we are, where are the others. Only when we have peace, we shall have a place in time, and we shall have Israel as a home, as it was meant to be. I think for me, a definition of the Jew is of someone who never really felt at home in the world. Never, even in the most hospitable places. There was always this slight doubt. Only if we have peace, we shall have a real home in this world for the first time in many, many years. We shall have a place. We shall have a future. We shall be, in a way, we shall really be able to start to live the life we deserve. We are trapped by this paradox of centuries. We are a people who, all our history, we survived to live our life, and eventually we live to survive only. And this is not enough. This is not enough when you have accumulated all this enormous military might, and all you aspire to is just to survive from one catastrophe to another. Something is wrong here. Something is wrong, and it turns things, you start to think that power is the ultimate goal. No, power is only a vehicle. So only having peace will be able to gradually, slowly, with many difficulties and many violations of this baby, newborn peace, only this will allow us to be in this life. So the question is, again, much deeper than the question of security in terms of army or water or where the exact borders will go. Let's take another question, which will be literary. Thank you.
Our last question over here in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to the novel.
Where is the question?
To the right.
Okay, yeah, okay, I see.
I wanted to ask about the setting. For full disclosure, I didn't read it, but from what I get, there is a lot of, you've taken this far away from the here and now of our lives in Israel. And I wondered if that was necessary in order to do the kind of introspection into something that is so extra personal and intimate.
I guess so. I didn't want to tell my private story. And most of my private story will remain private. But I suddenly was confronted with it. And such a loss is not necessarily Israeli or Egyptian or Chinese or American. It's universal. It's a universal experience. And it equalizes everyone, the duke and the woman who mends the nets of the fishermen. And as I said, I wanted to touch this existential, universal point in which we face death and we are speechless. And how do we proceed from this point on? This is what the book is about. Another question? Yeah?
I'm gonna say that we're out of time at this point. I'm sorry, but please join me in saying thank you both to Peter Orner and to David Grossman. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you. And join us outside for a reception and book signing. Thank you all.